You should be grateful we let you sit at the table. That's what my sister Denise whispered to me last Thanksgiving, smiling as if it were a joke. Grateful for being ignored? For paying the taxes on the house no one remembered I still co-owned? They passed mashed potatoes like they passed judgment, quick, silent, and always in one direction. No one asked how I'd been. No one noticed the pie I brought, again. But this year, I didn't just bring dessert. I brought the truth. And it sat heavier than the turkey. If you've ever been treated like a guest in your own family, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, count your blessings and drop a 0 because sometimes being quiet isn't a weakness. It's the last step before you take the whole table back. She laughed like I was a joke, but I wasn't the one with a dollar store purse. The line moved slowly, as always, and I didn't mind. I liked the silence. It gave me time to take in the garland that lined the walls of Blue Ridge Bank, the faint scent of cinnamon and cheap peppermint syrup lingering like a holiday guest no one invited. The floor squeaked when people shifted. The music playing overhead, some instrumental version of Silver Bells, was just loud enough to cover the rustle of coats. Mine was wool, charcoal gray, buttoned up to my neck. My mother's coat. She once told me it made me look like less of a disappointment. I never disagreed, but I never stopped wearing it either. Outside, Asheville's streets were lined with bare trees wrapped in string lights not yet lit. Inside, the sunlight bounced off the glass doors, casting long streaks across the marble floor. A golden pine cone dangled from a wreath on the far wall, shimmering in a way that felt more desperate than festive. It was the week before Thanksgiving. Everyone in town was pretending they still liked each other. That's when I heard her, Denise. Her laughter rose above the bank noise like a wind chime in a thunderstorm. Delicate, but too loud. She was at the front counter, chatting with the teller as if the two of them were catching up over wine. Same cashmere sweater, same soft pink lipstick, same effortless charm she wore like perfume. And the same scuffed corner on her faux leather purse. I noticed. I always noticed. She didn't see me at first. I stayed behind the man in front of me, studying the way she tilted her head. Denise was always good at angling herself toward admiration. I thought about the first time she dismissed me. I was 10, asking to borrow her church shoes. She said, "Even hand-me-downs have standards." I hadn't forgotten. I'd just learned to press mute. When it was finally my turn, I stepped up to the counter, and that's when she noticed. Her head turned just slightly, eyes grazing me with mild curiosity until recognition landed. Then the smirk appeared. "Oh," she said loudly. "Didn't know Shellcode Holdings hired family?" The teller, her name tag said Mia, froze for a second. Her hand, mid-type, hovered awkwardly above the keyboard. I didn't look at Denise. I looked at Mia. "I'd like to make a withdrawal," I said calmly. Mia nodded. "Of course. ID, please." I handed it over. She typed again, slower now, eyes flicking between me and Denise. I could see the question forming behind her lashes, but credit her for not asking it. Denise stayed. She leaned back against the counter, as if curious to see what came next. I waited, quiet and patient. The coat warmed my back. The purse in my hand felt heavier than usual, or maybe it was the air between us, thick with all the things we'd never said out loud. Mia passed me an envelope. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from nerves or air conditioning, I couldn't tell. I glanced at the corner of the envelope, creased. The label read, Shellcode Holdings, LLC. I felt Denise shift. Her whole posture changed. "Wait, you?" I met her gaze. She blinked once, twice. No retort came, no snide comment. Her eyes darted to the envelope, then to my purse, then back to me. I offered no explanation. Let silence do the work. Behind me, someone coughed. Mia cleared her throat and, in a clearly rehearsed attempt at small talk, asked, "Any plans for Thanksgiving?" "Just dinner at home," I replied. "Something quiet." She nodded politely, grateful for something ordinary to latch onto. I adjusted my grip on the envelope. The paper was thick, not like the ones they used to hand me back when I had $20 balances and overdraft fees. My fingers brushed the crease. It reminded me of something Grandpa Walter used to say when I was 5 and he gave me $10 in coins for my birthday, tucked into the mittens I wore in church. "Don't talk too loud with money," he whispered. I never did, but that day my silence said enough. I turned to leave. The coat swished lightly against my legs. The wreath near the door shimmered again, gaudy in the morning light. I didn't rush. The door opened with a soft hiss. Denise didn't follow. She just stood there, her hands still, her eyes trying to piece together a story I wasn't going to help her write. I paused at the threshold, turned just enough for her to hear. "Next time, add a few more zeros before you judge me." Some people build empires with money. I built mine with silence and a ledger. The hum of the radiator filled my apartment, its rattle comforting in the kind of way old memories sometimes are. Lemon oil clung to the furniture I'd polished earlier, mixing with the earthy steam of mint tea steeping on the windowsill. I cupped the mug with both hands and stared at the glow of the city streetlights below, a world that bustled loudly, just not in here. As I sipped, I remembered the first time I understood compound interest. Not from a textbook, but watching Grandpa Walter at our kitchen table, methodically rolling quarters into crinkled paper tubes. He wasn't teaching, he was surviving. But I was watching, always watching. That table was long gone, but the ritual remained. I opened my filing cabinet with its familiar resistant creak. Walter's handwriting labeled every folder. "Real names, not cute labels," he once told me, handing over his old fountain pen. I used that same pen now, its barrel chipped but the nib still true, and wrote with it like someone preserving lineage, not ink. A folder titled Shell Code Holdings Initial revealed the birth of what everyone thought I didn't have. Scanned statements, brokerage slips, annotated PDF printouts, each page carefully notated in blue ink. The sound of pages flipping echoed in the quiet room like church bells in reverse. Each sheet reminded me how I bought my first share of a biotech startup with the $500 Walter had gifted me on my 21st birthday. "Do something smart," he'd said. I had. I reinvested. I studied. I worked 3 jobs. At night, I stocked shelves at Price Max. During breaks, I took online courses in accounting while Denise was posting about cocktails with angel investors. They thought I was stuck, maybe because I didn't dress like I mattered. I remembered a family dinner. Thanksgiving, I think. Denise looked at my feet. My shoes were scuffed from winter salt and grocery floors, and said, loud enough for the whole table, "3 jobs and still can't afford decent shoes." My silence was the reply. That, and the quiet stacking of assets and folders no one ever saw. Beneath the floorboards of my hall closet was a small metal box. Not a metaphor, an actual box bolted into the subfloor. It held Walter's original note, the first dividend check I ever received, and a handful of folded $20 bills I refused to deposit just yet. I kept them as a reminder that even paper, when stacked with discipline, could bear the weight of dignity. Sometimes I knelt by that spot at night, just to check that it was still there. I wasn't guarding money, I was guarding my memory. The walls of my apartment bore little in the way of decoration. A single photo, Walter and me beside his old Buick, hung above the radiator. Books lined the shelves, mostly thrifted copies, some annotated in the margins. I didn't have guests. This place wasn't for display. It was a retreat, a monastery built not of stone, but of silence and ledgers. I remember 2 winters ago, Denise called me out of the blue. Her voice is syrupy, but shaky underneath. Just a small loan, Mare. A bridge till next quarter. I listened. Then I said no, not with malice. Just clarity. I'd learned the difference between helping and enabling. Back in the present, I returned to my desk. The cracked screen of my laptop lit up softly. Despite its age, 15 years and 2 motherboards, it still ran. I checked the latest valuation report. Shellcode Holdings, $3.5 million. Not inherited, not married. Built. I stood and walked to the small table near the window, the one no family member had ever sat at. The tea had gone cold, but the scent lingered, mint from my balcony garden. I'd always said I couldn't keep things alive, but here I was, sipping proof otherwise. I sat for a moment longer, letting the radiator hum lull my thoughts. I remembered the long-ago holidays, loud laughter, second servings, the clinking of forks on porcelain. I always sat at the edge of those dinners, folding napkins, watching the performance. Even back then, I knew I wasn't part of the scene. I was the one who swept up after. Now I'm writing the script. I stacked the folders back into place, clicked the cabinet shut, and placed Walter's pen beside a note on the desk. I'd written it earlier, but now I underlined it. Meeting scheduled, Blue Ridge Bank, Friday. I turned off the lamp and left one note on the desk. Meeting scheduled, Blue Ridge Bank, Friday. Funny how people treat you differently when your signature means something. The bank was warmer than usual, though maybe it was just me. The air carried the now familiar scent of cinnamon, an overzealous plug-in air freshener tucked behind the poinsettia display. It reminded me, oddly, of the holidays I spent alone in this town. Years when Denise hosted family dinners I was never invited to. I used to tell myself I preferred the quiet. Maybe I did. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. The lobby hummed with end-of-week activity. Paper rustled, heels clicked against tile, voices murmured over accounts and auto debits. Holiday garlands dropped slightly above the teller windows, their glue losing patience. I sat near the frosted window, coat folded neatly over my lap, clutching the manila folder against my chest. Inside, documents, identifications, and something more potent. Truth. As I waited, a memory surfaced, blunt and sudden. I must have been 7, Denise 10. Mom had brought us to the bank to open a savings account. Denise sat beside her, chattering with the bank associate, all bracelets and high ponytail. I was told to wait on a lobby bench, holding a bag of ginger cookies we'd brought from home. I remember the itchy fabric of my tights, the hard vinyl of the seat, and Denise laughing, loud and light, like she belonged there. I didn't speak the whole visit, just stared at the floor and memorized the swirls in the tile, the same tile I now sat above. Ms. Reynolds? Mr. Crawley's voice, clipped and formal, broke the moment. He stood at the hallway entrance, holding a tablet and feigning indifference. I followed him past the glassed-in offices to one labeled Investments. The carpet softened our steps. Inside, I handed him the folder. He took his time, flipping through. His expression changed around page 3. First a lift of his brow, then a pause, as if the puzzle had formed unexpectedly. Shellcode Holdings, he said under his breath, then more audibly, And you're listed as sole managing director. I nodded. Since 2009. The EIN is valid. The valuation sheets are current as of last quarter. He looked at me differently then, not with awe, but with recalibrated respect, like someone reassessing the dimensions of a room they thought they'd memorized. "I'll fetch Denise," he said finally. She entered briskly, expecting a client handoff. The way she froze at the sight of me, seated confidently, papers signed, pen in hand, was nearly cinematic. "Marion," she blinked. "What's going on?" "I'm completing a trust transfer. Shellcode Holdings is being restructured under a private investment vehicle." Her voice rose a notch. "Shellcode? How are you even involved?" I smiled, unsnapped the pen, and signed the next line. The ink flowed steadily, despite the tremble in my hand. "Since before you learned how to spell holdings." Denise's lips parted, but no sound came. I thought of a family party once, years ago, where she'd told Aunt Claire that I probably sat home watching cat videos all day. I hadn't corrected her then. I'd just filed the comment away, like I did everything else. Quietly, carefully. Crawley excused himself, sensing what was unfolding wasn't strictly financial. The two junior staffers nearby had gone still, pretending not to eavesdrop. But I knew the way whispers travel in sterile rooms. One of them, a redhead barely out of college, stole a glance through the glass. I caught her eyes and held them for a beat. She looked away, but her posture changed. No pity, not confusion. Something else, recognition. The other, a young man with a name tag that read Devon, stood at the printer, with his hand paused mid-tap. He too had heard enough. Their silence felt heavier than Denise's words. I wondered if they'd whisper later. "Did you know she owned Shellcode?" "No way. She looked so normal." As if power had a costume. Denise found her voice. "Wait, Marion, let's talk." I handed her the final document. "Signature required. Resignation acknowledged." The words were neat, typed in legal font. My own signature already gleamed beneath it in blue ink. She stared at the page. Her hands, so often adorned with rings and polish, looked bare today. Maybe she'd rushed out. Maybe she hadn't expected to need armor. I caught my reflection in the glass pane behind her. My coat still buttoned, my hair pulled back, my face calm, but not cold. Not anymore. Just done. Have you ever realized you were erased, not with words, but with silence and signatures? If you've ever been left out by the people who claim to love you, comment 7 below. Let's see what happened next. I didn't speak again. I let the cinnamon linger, and the silence stretched. We always carve the turkey, but never the truth. The dining room smelled of time and unresolved history. I arrived last, clutching a bottle of Merlot and a modest pumpkin pie in a foil tin. Susan opened the door with a polite smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Oh, you still bake?" she asked, voice syrupy. I handed her the pie without answering. She didn't reach for it. Inside, the table was already set. The vintage lace tablecloth draped over the long oak surface, and the chandelier above flickered uncertainty, casting shadows over fogged windows. The turkey sat proudly in the center, flanked by bowls of mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans, and a cranberry mold wobbling in our mother's silver dish. The air buzzed with forced cheer and the clink of silverware. No music, only coughs and throat clearing, and the dull scrape of chairs against hardwood. Ruth, my mother, wore her usual Thanksgiving brooch, a silver maple leaf, though today I noticed the pin was cracked at the stem. Denise filled water glasses with exaggerated energy, her smile too practiced. Uncle Ken made a joke about trust funds and audit season, but it hung limp in the air. I sat at my usual seat, third from the end, beside the empty chair where Dad used to sit. No one looked directly at me, not even Ruth. Dinner began like always, with an overly formal blessing and the ceremonial carving. Uncle Ken took the knife, but the bird resisted, its skin rubbery and unyielding. A metaphor, maybe. Conversation tiptoed around weather, football, and Denise's latest fundraiser. She laughed too loudly, her pearls catching the chandelier's weak light. Then she said it. "Well, I hope our retirement plans are sturdier than this stuffing. Might need a trust fund to survive the holidays." I set my fork down, carefully aligning it beside my knife. "Speaking of trusts," I began, voice calm. The room stilled. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. No dramatics, just a clean manila folder, embossed with the name Shell Code Holdings. I opened it gently, sliding out the documents like I had rehearsed the moment in a quieter life. "I've officially transferred the family assets into a private investment trust," I said, not looking at Denise. "It's under my control now. Full management. Effective last Friday, silence. The kind that hums." Susan blinked. Ruth's hand froze midair, clutching a napkin. Denise scoffed, but her hand trembled as she reached for her wine. "You're joking!" I didn't respond. Ruth stood, as if to leave, but instead, she asked quietly, "Why now?" I didn't answer right away. I reached into my bag again and held up Grandpa Walter's old savings book. The leather was cracked, the corners curled. My name was now stamped beneath his, freshly embossed. "Because he trusted me," I said. "You just didn't look close enough." That sentence landed with more weight than I intended. I saw it in Ruth's eyes, something breaking and folding into itself. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the serving spoon. I'd never seen her hands unsteady, even when Dad was in hospice. That frightened me more than anything anyone said. Have you ever stood up for yourself, not with anger, but with proof? That quiet, steady kind of justice. If you've ever had to show someone who you really are, drop a comment 9 below. Now let's see how it ends. Susan pushed peas around her plate. Uncle Ken coughed into his sleeve. As I reached for the potatoes, a memory stopped me cold. I was maybe 10 or 11, standing in our old kitchen beside Dad. We weren't talking, just peeling potatoes in rhythm. His hands moved slowly, methodical, the skin curling into a metal bowl. Every so often, he'd glance at mine, never correcting, just checking. I remember the warmth of that moment, the steam fogging the window, the closeness of doing something simple together. It was the last Thanksgiving we had before he passed. I blinked and the room came back into focus. Denise laughed nervously. "Well, Marion," she said, "that's quite the announcement. Maybe next year you'll bring something besides pie." I smiled. Maybe I will. And that's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. Susan once organized a family recipe book. I asked if I could contribute. She told me, "Oh, it's mostly for people who actually cook from scratch." That was the year she forgot the yeast in the rolls. I never said a word, just brought store-bought pie ever since. Ruth adjusted her brooch. The cracked pin caught my eye again. I wondered if she even noticed it was broken. Or maybe, like everything else, she noticed and chose to pretend it wasn't. Suddenly, Denise's glass slipped from her fingers. It clattered against the plate, but didn't shatter. Water spilled across the table, bleeding into the lace like ink into fabric. No one moved. I met Denise's eyes. I didn't flinch. Denise drops her glass. "It doesn't break. Neither do I." "Some truths knock," Others slide under the door while you're boiling tea. I was rinsing out my mug when I saw it. An envelope, ivory and trembling slightly from the draft, nudged halfway beneath my door like it had changed its mind. My name was on it. Just Marion. No return address, no postage, but I knew the handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I stood there in the kitchen, watching the steam curl from the kettle, listening to the radiator tick and sigh like it was carrying some grief of its own. Outside, someone's holiday lights blinked red and green, a cheerful code I couldn't decipher. Inside, the only light came from the little lamp over the sink. Software dull. Honest. Mom used to say, "You'll understand when you're older." I just never expected older people to feel like this, still waiting to be invited into the conversation. I finally opened the envelope with the butter knife. Inside were 3 pages of lined stationery. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, more hesitant. She started with, "I owe you more than time will allow me to fix." She wrote about the vase, how when Susan broke it, she blamed me without question. "You were always the quiet one," she said. "Easier to place the silence on you than confront the noise in Susan." The words scratched something open in me, something buried under years of practiced calm. She confessed that she saw too much of Walter in me. "He scared me," she admitted, "not for who he was, but for how much he kept to himself. You did that too, Marion. I was never sure what you were thinking, and it made me feel like a bad mother." There it was. Not an apology wrapped in roses, just fear disguised as parenting. She went on to explain that she thought Susan needed the attention more, and Denise was loud enough to demand it. "But you, Marion, you disappeared too well." I didn't cry right away. I folded the letter slowly, placed it on the counter beside my tea. I made tea I didn't drink, some things you prepare for out of habit. I walked into the living room and sank into the couch. The flannel shirt I wore was my father's, still soft, still smelling faintly of cedar and old books. I pulled it tighter around me, as if he were still in it. The apartment felt heavier now, not sad, just full. The jazz on the radio drifted into a saxophone solo, mournful and soft. I turned it down and listened to the quiet between the radiator's clicks. I pulled out Grandpa Walter's ledger, the one with my notes and statements, organized to the decimal. Tucked into the back was an old photo of him holding me as a baby, his hand cradling my head like something sacred. I slid the letter underneath it. "Maybe now," I whispered, "you're finally in the right place." The hallway outside was quiet, but my mind wandered to a different kind of silence, one from a Christmas Eve long ago. I must have been 8. The power had gone out from a snowstorm, and we lit the dining room with candles. Susan and Denise were bickering, but Grandpa Walter just hummed some old tune while helping Mom slice pie by flashlight. We ate by flickering light, bundled in sweaters, passing cranberry sauce like we were rich in warmth, if nothing else. For that one night, we were closer in the dark than we'd ever been in daylight. I rubbed the sleeve of Dad's flannel, remembering how his arms used to stretch behind me as I sat at the kitchen table doing long division. He never gave me answers, just waited, tapping his ring on the table, humming low. When I got it right, he'd nod once and return to reading the paper. No cheers, no praise, just presence. I missed that kind of quiet love most of all. Before the phone rang, I walked back to the kitchen. I picked up the mug of tea and brought it to my lips, but stopped just short. The steam had vanished. The surface had dulled. I set it down again. On the fridge was an old photo strip of me and Susan at a county fair. I'd kept it for years, though I couldn't explain why. We were both sunburned and laughing. No one had told us yet who we were supposed to become. Maybe I held on to it because it reminded me that even the most crooked family trees started somewhere with light. And then the ring came, a clean, sharp sound that sliced through all the memory and hush. I blinked. It was late. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." I picked up slowly. "This is Marion." Silence. Then a voice, low, deliberate. "We're ready for the vote." Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what they never expected you to carry. The snow had started before dawn, just a faint brushing on the sidewalks, like powdered sugar on a cooled pie. I arrived at Shell Code headquarters a few minutes early, breath visible in the cold air, my scarf wrapped tight beneath the collar of my long wool coat. The building loomed quiet but not cold, familiar, almost reverent now. For a moment, I paused in the lobby and looked around. The same green marble floors, the polished brass elevator doors. And suddenly, I remembered the first time I had ever stepped into this building, years ago, barely tall enough to see over the receptionist's desk. Grandpa Walter had brought me, told me to wear clean shoes and not to fidget. I remember holding his hand tightly, overwhelmed by all the tall people in suits and the echo of voices. "You don't have to talk today," he said. "Just listen. Listen and learn to walk like you belong." Back then, I didn't know what that meant. Today, I did. The receptionist greeted me with a soft, "Good morning, Ms. Marion," and I nodded. That name still startled me sometimes, how it sounded when spoken with respect. The private conference room was lined with oak paneling. A grandfather clock stood sentinel in the corner, its ticks patient and precise. Light filtered in through wide frosted windows. The board of trustees sat around a long polished table, murmurs subdued as I entered. Denise's seat, third from the right, was empty. "Thank you all for coming," I began. No need to clear my throat. No need to apologize for the years they overlooked me. I opened the meeting with the new mission: small grants for local education, community seed funds, no speculative ventures. "Shell Code will no longer be a vault," I said. "It will be a garden." There were nods. One of the younger board members, Harris, adjusted his glasses and asked a question about the disbursement schedule. Another commented on the clarity of the bylaws. Legal counsel smiled and slid the documents forward. I signed them with the same pen I'd used since my accounting exams. Blue ink, smooth stroke. The clock chimed once, then again. Noon. One of the older trustees, Mrs. Latimer, leaned forward and said, "You know, we underestimated you." I smiled gently. "I'm used to that." No one laughed, but they understood. After the meeting, I didn't linger. I stepped into the hallway, heels echoing softly on the marble. Down near the south atrium was the bench. Grandpa Walter used to sit there during meetings, a thermos of weak coffee in hand, nodding along without speaking much. That bench had aged too, its varnish dulled, one armrest slightly warped. I sat down. The scarf I wore, his gift from my 24th birthday, still smelled faintly of cedar. A young intern passed by. "Ms. Marion?" he asked. "My aunt got one of those letters. The education grant." She cried. "Thank you," I nodded. "Tell her to keep going." He smiled and left. That was enough. Outside, the snow thickened. I adjusted my gloves, stood up slowly. Before leaving, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope from the bank. Creased, the paper softened with age and handling. "I kept it," I whispered. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. I walked to the front doors. The glass reflected my coat, my scarf, my eyes. I didn't look back at the conference room, only forward. The wind picked up as I stepped onto the marble steps. Cold sliced across my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. I tucked the envelope deeper into my coat, as if it belonged there. Legacy, I thought, isn't what they write down. It's what they never thought you'd carry. And you do. Quietly. Completely. I passed a holiday wreath hanging crooked on the doorframe. Somewhere, distant bells jingled. I remembered stringing lights with Walter. He'd test each one carefully before letting me climb the stool. "Nothing worse than a broken bulb hiding in the middle," he used to say. At the curb, my rideshare hadn't arrived yet. I stood quietly, watching a few children build a snowman near the courtyard. A mother called them in for cocoa. The world kept moving. I pulled the scarf higher. My breath rose in clouds, curling upward before vanishing. The steps behind me faded into soft snowfall. No audience, no applause, just peace. Some mornings, I still wake up expecting the weight of silence. But instead, I find space. Quiet? Yes, but not empty. I've come to understand that family isn't always about mending what's broken. Sometimes it's learning to live with the cracks and still setting the table. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past, but it can soften the corners of memory. And perhaps that's enough. A truth carried, not shouted, but known. If this story echoed something inside you, maybe take a breath and think about the stories folded quietly within your own family. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.